स्टडी IQ IAS, अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल।
Welcome to StudyIQ's new initiative, the podcast. I am your host, Dipansh Murjani. Welcome all. In the last episode of the podcast, we discussed whether our constitution is a borrowed document or not. And in today's episode, we will discuss about historical background of our constitution and all the important acts related to it. Sir, our present constitution was prepared after the hard work of our constitution makers for 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. However, for our constitution to evolve, do you think that this time frame is enough or it goes much beyond that in British era? What is your opinion?
To understand our constitutional background and development, we need to understand some historical events, and I will walk you through some historical background to it. Number one, the Battle of Buxar in the year of 1764, we can see that EIC got Diwani rights, which is right to collect revenue in the region of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. In 1767, we can see that EIC first time intervened in Indian affairs, where they demanded the share in plunder, which was around £4 million per year. During the years 1765 to 1772, they followed dual system of government, and company rule and British government have enacted multiple acts which ultimately impacted the Constitution of India.
Sir, can you please zoom out a bit and make us aware about the major phases of these acts?
To understand the development of these acts, we need to divide these in two phases. The first phase, which is company rule from 1773 to 1858, and the second phase is crown rule from 1858 to 1947.
Sir, after the Regulating Act of 1773, we witnessed that British government started controlling the affairs of East India Company. So how important it was to gain control of India through East India Company by British government?
During the Regulating Act of 1773, Warren Hastings was the Governor General. British government recognizes that there are two major functions of the company, which is EIC has divided two functions for political and administrative functions. This laid the foundation of central administration in India. First time, Governor of Bengal made as Governor General of Bengal, whereas it created Executive Council for assisting Governor General of Bengal, which consists of 4+1 members. Governor of Bombay and Governor of Madras were made subsidiary to Governor General of Bengal. Through this Act of 1773, Supreme Court at Calcutta was also established in 1774. This act made Court of Directors, which was governing body of EIC, a mandatory to report to British government on three affairs. Number one, civil, military and revenue in India. Through the Acts of 1781, the established Supreme Court got its defined jurisdiction, and it was allowed to administer the personal law. Social and religious usage of subjects, people were to be honored.
Sir, the next important act was the Pitt's India Act of 1784, in which British government started controlling East India Company a little more as compared to the Regulating Act. So how can you explain the importance of Pitt's India Act in terms of constitutional development of our country?
Pitt's India Act 1784, during this period, Warren Hastings was Governor General. Company became a subordinate department of British government, as you mentioned. Company's territories in India were termed as British possession. Therefore, British government segregated two major functions, that is commercial function and political function, where Court of Directors were governing commercial functions and political functions were governed by Board of Control.
Sir, after the Pitt's India Act, three Charter Acts were introduced: Charter Act of 1813, Charter Act of 1833 and Charter Act of 1853. And the common thread between them is the fact that British government slowly and steadily started to control the monopoly of the East India Company. So how can you explain this?
So we have to understand the historical background which was happening globally that time. Powerful business class in Britain questioned EIC's trade monopoly in India. It was because Napoleon closed European ports for Britain and its traders. It resulted in ending the EIC's monopoly over trade in India. However, EIC continued trading in tea and trade with China. Through the Charter Act of 1833, the lease of EIC was extended by 20 more years. Territories of India were to be governed in the name of the Crown. Monopoly of EIC in tea and trade to China was also abolished. And administratively, Governor General of Bengal was made Governor General of India. And first Governor General of India was Lord William Benedict. To increase the representation, law members were added in Governor General's Council. Indian laws were to be codified and consolidated. This Act of 1833 abolished the slavery in 1843. This also had opened the competition for selection in civil services.
Sir, the last charter was the Charter Act of 1853, and it becomes quite important because through this act, Indian Legislative Council was formed. What is your point of view?
Here, in Charter Act of 1853, Governor General of India got separate functions where legislative and executive functions were separated. Additional 6 members were added to legislative councillors. Simply, it created Legislative Council, and it was also known as Indian Legislative Council. This functions like mini parliament at the present time. The Act also introduced open competition in selection and recruitment of civil servants. And according to Macaulay Committee in 1854, the covenanted, that is, higher civil services, was thrown open to Indians as well. For the first time, it introduced local representation in India's mini parliament, that is, Indian Legislative Council. For example, out of 6 legislative councillors, 4 to be appointed by local government of Madras, Bombay, Bengal and Agra.
Sir, thank you for your guidance. Listeners, in the next episode, we will continue our discussion on historical background. Till then, keep studying and stay connected with StudyIQ.